In the amber glow of a single candle, Mabel Drummond's paintbrush trembled as she traced the outline of metals that would never again rest upon her husband's chest. The war had taken many things from the valley: sons, fathers, the sweet certainty of morning prayers without the weight of grief. But it had taken something different from Jonah Clayton. Not his life, though some nights he wished it had. Not his mind, though the screams still echoed when thunder rolled across the hills. It had taken his legs, clean through the knee, and, with them, the man he believed himself to be. Mabel found him that first evening home, slumped in the wooden chair by their bedroom window, staring at nothing. The medals lay scattered across the pine dresser where she'd placed them: Bronze Star, Purple Heart, the service ribbons that once made her chest swell with pride. Now they seemed to mock the silence between them. "They don't belong on me anymore," he'd whispered, his voice rough as bark. "What's the point of honors when you can't stand to receive them?" She'd wanted to argue, to tell him that courage wasn't measured in working limbs, that love wasn't diminished by scars. Instead, she'd watched him sleep that night, his face finally peaceful in unconsciousness, and an idea had bloomed like wildflower through concrete. The candlewick flickered as Mabel lifted her brush again. She'd never been much of an artist. Her hands were better suited to kneading bread, mending shirts, the practical magics of keeping a household whole. But here, in the dancing shadows of their bedroom, she discovered something sacred in the act of creation. Each metal took shape slowly on the whitewashed wall beside their bed. The Bronze Star first, its edges catching imaginary light. She mixed the paint herself, ochre and burnt sienna for the bronze, a touch of vermilion for depth. Her fingers cramped, but she pressed on, determined to capture not just the shape, but the weight of what these symbols meant. Jonah stirred in his sleep, one hand reaching unconsciously toward the space where his legs should have been. The movement never failed to crack something inside her chest. Dr. Holloway had explained about phantom limbs, how the mind takes time to accept what the body knows. But Mabel understood phantom hearts too, the way love keeps reaching for what was lost, keeps painting hope on empty walls. The Bronze Star was nearly complete when she heard the first whisper of dawn birds outside their window. She'd worked through the night without realizing, lost in the meditation of steady brushstrokes and careful color. Her back ached, but something else had settled in its place: purpose, perhaps, or defiance. She cleaned her brushes in the basin, careful not to wake Jonah. The painted metal gleamed wetly in the fading candlelight, imperfect but undeniably real. Tomorrow night, she would add another, and another, until the wall bloomed with all the honors he refused to claim. What she didn't know was that across town, in the cramped office above Mercer's General Store, Carson Blair was bent over a different kind of ledger. The banker's son had returned from the war too, but with his legs intact and his conscience considerably lighter. The numbers in his book told stories of foreclosed farms, desperate families, opportunities seized from those too broken to fight back. The Clayton farm was worth more than most: good bottomland, a creek that never ran dry, timber rights that stretched into the foothills. And Jonah Clayton, decorated war hero turned invalid, was exactly the kind of man Carson had learned to prey upon. Men who'd lost their fight. Men whose wives were too proud to ask for help until it was too late. Carson closed the ledger and smiled. He'd pay the Claytons a visit soon. Very soon. Meanwhile, in the cottage that shared a fence line with the Clayton property, Nia Rhodes sat by her own window, watching the candlelight flicker in Mabel's bedroom. She'd been Mabel's closest friend since childhood, had stood beside her at the altar when Jonah came courting with wildflowers and promises. She'd also been there the day the telegram arrived, had held Mabel while she sobbed against the kitchen table. Now Nia saw something else in that dancing light. Determination, maybe, or desperation. She made a mental note to visit tomorrow, to bring fresh eggs and whatever comfort she could offer. Some burdens were too heavy for one woman to carry alone. The candle finally guttered out as true dawn painted the sky rose and gold. Mabel stood back to examine her work, her nightgown speckled with paint. Her hair escaped from its braid. The Bronze Star looked back at her from the wall, perfectly imperfect, gloriously defiant, in the bed behind her. Jonah's eyes opened slowly. He'd been awake for the last hour, listening to the whisper of brush on wall, breathing in the sharp scent of paint and the sweeter fragrance of his wife's unwavering faith. He turned his head just enough to see what she'd created. For the first time since coming home, something shifted in his chest. Not quite hope, that would take longer. But recognition, perhaps, that love sometimes wore paint-stained nightgowns and refused to let heroes disappear into their own shadows. But outside, the sound of horses' hooves on the morning road suggested that some shadows were riding closer. Then either of them knew. 3 days passed before Carson Blair made his move, and he chose his moment with the precision of a man who understood weakness. The morning fog still clung to the valley floor when his black gelding picked its way up the Clayton Drive, hooves muffled in the damp earth. Mabel was hanging laundry when she spotted him. Crisp suit, polished boots, that smile that never quite reached his eyes. She'd known Carson since he was a boy pulling girls' braids at church socials. The war had changed him into something harder, more calculating. Success suited him like expensive cologne, overwhelming and slightly nauseating. "Mrs. Clayton," he called, tipping his hat with theatrical courtesy. "Mighty fine morning, isn't it?" She didn't answer immediately, just continued pinning Jonah's shirts to the line. Each one had been tailored now, the lower portions shortened and hemmed. Small adaptations that spoke of permanence, of acceptance. She wasn't sure either of them felt yet. "What brings you out this way, Carson?" Her voice carried the careful neutrality of a woman who'd learned to read storms in men's faces. "Business, I'm afraid." He dismounted with practiced ease, those soft banker's hands straightening. His jacket. "Hate to trouble you folks, but there are matters that need addressing." Inside the house, Jonah heard the voices and felt his jaw tighten. He'd been practicing with the wheeled chair Dr. Holloway had ordered from back east, a contraption of wood and metal that made him feel like a child's broken toy. But pride was a luxury he could no longer afford, not with Mabel bearing so much alone. The chair's wheels caught on the kitchen doorframe twice before he managed to navigate to the front porch. Carson's eyes flicked downward for just a moment, long enough to catalog the damage, short enough to maintain plausible politeness. "Jonah, good to see you, friend." Carson's handshake was firm, aggressive. "Heard you were back." "Shame about." "Well, we're all grateful for your service." The words hung in the air like smoke from a dead fire. Grateful, as if gratitude could rebuild shattered bone, restore stolen futures. "What do you want, Blair?" Jonah's voice had found its edge again, the officer's tone that once made recruits stand straighter. Carson's smile widened. Direct as always. "I appreciate that in a man." He pulled a leather portfolio from his saddlebags, papers rustling like dry leaves. "I'm here about your mortgage payments." Mabel's hands stilled on the clothesline. They'd been careful with money. Her vegetable garden, Jonah's disability pension, the small savings they'd accumulated before the war. But medical expenses had eaten through their reserves like locusts through wheat. "We're current," Jonah said carefully. "For now, yes. But winter's coming, and frankly, your situation has changed." Carson's tone remained conversational, almost friendly. "Banks got to consider long-term viability. A man in your condition, well, farming's physical work." The words hit like slaps. Mabel stepped closer to Jonah's chair, her hand finding his shoulder. Through the window, she could see the wall where she'd painted 3 medals now: Bronze Star, Purple Heart, and the Combat Infantry Badge. Each night brought another small act of defiance, another refusal to let valor fade into shadow. "This land's been in my family 40 years, Jonah said quietly. "My father cleared these fields with his own hands. And you've got no sons to carry on." Carson's words were surgical in their cruelty. "Face facts, Jonah. You can't work the land anymore. Your wife can't do it alone. The kindest thing would be to sell now, while you can still get a fair price." From across the fence line, Nia Rhodes watched the confrontation unfold. She'd been feeding her chickens when Carson arrived, and something in his posture, predatory, patient, made her linger by the coop. Now she saw Mabel's face go pale, saw Jonah's hands clench on his chair's armrests. Nia had her own secrets about Carson Blair. She'd seen him at the Riverside Tavern, drunk and boastful, talking about all the opportunities the war had created for smart men willing to seize them. Broken soldiers made easy targets, especially ones too proud to ask for help. "We're not selling," Mabel said firmly. "This is our home." Carson's laugh was soft, patronizing. "Mrs. Clayton, sentiment's a luxury you can't afford anymore." I'm offering you a way out with dignity intact. Don't make me come back with less generous terms. I'm offering you a way out with dignity intact. Don't make me come back with less generous terms. The threat hung between them like a blade. Carson tucked his papers away, mounted his horse with casual confidence. Think it over. You've got until the end of the month. As his hoofbeats faded down the drive, silence settled over the porch like dust. Mabel stared at the horizon where Carson had disappeared, her mind racing through calculations. How much they owed, how much time they had, what options remained for a disabled veteran and his determined wife. Mabel. Jonah's voice was rough, with shame. Maybe he's right. Maybe I should, don't. She whirled to face him, eyes blazing. Don't you dare finish that sentence, Jonah Clayton. That man doesn't know the first thing about what we're capable of. That night, she painted with unusual fervor. The service metal took shape under her brush, each detail rendered with fierce precision. But as the hours passed, she found herself adding something new, not another metal, but a figure beside them. A woman in a paint-stained dress, brush raised. Like a weapon against the dark. In the bed, Jonah watched his wife work and felt something stir that he'd thought buried with his legs on a battlefield far from home. Not quite hope, not yet, but something fiercer. Something that tasted like defiance and smelled like fresh paint and candlelight. But neither of them noticed the shadow that passed by their window near midnight, or heard the soft footsteps that paused just long enough to peer inside at Mabel's growing mural of painted courage. The shadow belonged to Axel Langley, though few in the valley would have recognized him anymore. The boy who'd left for war with bright eyes and his mother's blessing had returned as something altogether different, hollow-cheeked, wild-haired, moving through the darkness like smoke given form. He'd been watching the Clayton house for weeks. Now, drawn by the candlelight that flickered in their bedroom window long after decent folk had taken to their beds. Tonight, pressed against the weathered siding, he finally understood what Mabel was creating. The painted metals gleamed in the dancing light, but it was the figure beside them that made his breath catch. A woman refusing to let valor die, one brushstroke at a time. Axel knew about refusing to let things die. He carried his own ghosts, his own painted memories that no amount of whiskey could wash away. But where Mabel painted hope, Axel had learned to paint only in shades of vengeance. He'd heard Carson Blair's visit through the valley's whisper network, how the banker's son was circling the Clayton farm like a vulture, waiting for desperation to ripen into opportunity. What the gossips didn't know was that Axel had his own history with Carson, forged in the mud and blood of a place called Shiloh Creek, where heroes were separated from cowards by inches and instinct. Inside the house, Mabel set down her brush and stepped back to survey her night's work. The service medal was complete, and she'd begun sketching the outline of the marksman's badge. But something felt different tonight, a weight in the air, a sense of being observed. She moved to the window and peered out into the darkness, seeing nothing but moonlight on grass. Someone there. Jonah's voice was alert, the soldier's awareness that never truly slept. Just shadows, she murmured, but her hand lingered on the curtain point 3 houses down the lane. Reed Mercer sat at his kitchen table with a bottle of corn whiskey and a decision that had been eating at him for days. As the town's general store owner, he heard everything. Who was struggling, who was thriving, who was about to lose everything they'd worked for. The Clayton situation troubled him more than most. Jonah had been a good customer before the war, always paid his bills on time, treated folks with respect. And Mabel? Reed had carried a quiet torch for her since they were youngsters. Before Jonah came courting with his easy smile and soldier's confidence. Now Reed knew things. Carson Blair's real plans for the Clayton property. The railroad survey that hadn't been made public yet. The one that would run right through the Clayton's bottomland. That information was worth a fortune to the right people, and Carson was betting the Claytons would never learn about it until after they'd sold for a fraction of what the land would soon be worth. Reed took another pull from the bottle and made his choice. Some debts couldn't be paid in coin. The next morning brought Esme Holloway to the Clayton door, her medical bag in one hand and a basket of fresh bread in the other. As the town doctor's wife, she'd made it her mission to check on the returning veterans, especially those whose wounds went deeper than flesh. "How are you managing, dear?" she asked Mabel as they sat in the kitchen, Watching Jonah work through his exercises in the front room, Mabel's hands were stained with paint. She'd worked until dawn again, adding detail to the marksman's badge. "We're managing fine, Esme. Thank you for asking." But Esme's trained eye caught what politeness tried to hide. The dark circles under Mabel's eyes, the slight tremor in her paint-stained fingers, the way she flinched every time a horse passed. On the road outside, "Mabel," Esme said gently, "you know about Carson Blair's offer?" The younger woman's spine straightened. News travels fast in a small town. Too fast sometimes, but not always fast enough. Esme leaned forward, lowering her voice. "There are things you should know. About Carson. About your land." Before Mabel could respond, a commotion erupted from the front yard. Through the window, they saw Nia Rhodes hurrying up the drive, her face flushed with excitement and worry. "Mabel." "Jonah," Nia called, not bothering with polite knocking. "You need to hear this." She burst into the kitchen, breathless and wild-eyed. "I was at Mercer's store this morning, picking up supplies, when Reed pulled me aside. Says he's got information about your land, about why Carson's so eager to buy it." The three women clustered around the table as Nia explained what Reed had shared: the railroad survey, the speculation, Carson's calculated deception. Each word fell like stones in still water, sending ripples of understanding through Mabel's mind. "So the land's worth more than he's offering," Mabel said slowly. "Much more. But only if you can hold on to it long enough for the railroad to make their plans public." Nia gripped Mabel's hand. "The question is, can you?" From the front room came the sound of Jonah's wheelchair navigating the hallway. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, having caught enough of the conversation to understand its weight. "How long?" he asked. "Reed thinks 6 months, maybe 8. Before the railroad announces officially," Nia replied. Esme nodded grimly. "Which means Carson will apply more pressure before then. Men like him don't give up easily when there's profit involved." That evening, as Mabel prepared her paints by candlelight, she felt the weight of time pressing against her shoulders. 6 months. 8 at most. Could they survive Carson's escalating threats that long? Could their marriage withstand the strain of poverty and uncertainty? She lifted her brush and began work on a new element. Not a metal this time, but a landscape. Rolling hills, a creek running silver under painted moonlight, timber standing tall and proud. Their land as she saw it in her dreams, as it could be if they found the strength to fight for it. Outside, Axel Langley watched from his hiding place in the treeline. He'd heard Nia's news through the kitchen window, and it confirmed what he'd suspected about Carson's motives. The war had taught Axel many things: how to move silently, how to wait patiently, how to strike when the moment was right. Carson Blair thought he could prey on broken soldiers and their desperate wives. But some wounds created warriors, not victims. Some shadows carried teeth. Mabel painted their land into existence on the bedroom wall. Neither she nor Jonah noticed the figure that detached itself from the darkness and began walking purposefully toward town, where certain conversations needed to happen before dawn. Carson Blair was dreaming of railroad money when the knock came at his door, soft, polite, but insistent in the way that suggested the visitor wouldn't be leaving without satisfaction. He pulled on his robe and descended the stairs of his father's grand house, the one that overlooked the valley like a hawk surveying prey. Axel Langley stood on the porch, hat in hand, looking nothing like the wild creature who haunted the hills. In the lamplight, he appeared almost respectable, clean-shaven, clothes pressed, the picture of a veteran calling on an old comrade. "Axel." Carson's surprise was genuine, though not entirely pleasant. "Didn't expect to see you. Thought you'd taken to avoiding civilized company. Had some thinking to do. War does that to a man." Axel's voice carried no trace of the madness people whispered about. "Mind if I come in? Got something to discuss." Carson hesitated. Axel Langley made him nervous in ways he couldn't quite articulate. Something about those pale eyes that seemed to see too much, remember too clearly. But refusing would raise questions, and Carson's success depended on maintaining his reputation as a reasonable man. Of course. Coffee. They sat in Carson's father's study, surrounded by leather-bound books and the smell of old money. Axel accepted the coffee but didn't drink, just held the cup like a prop in some elaborate performance. "Heard you're looking to buy the Clayton place," Axel said conversationally. Carson's shoulders relaxed slightly. Business talk he could handle. Word travels. Yes, I've made them an offer. Generous, considering their circumstances. Generous. Axel repeated the word as if tasting something bitter. That's one way to put it. Another might be opportunistic. Predatory, even. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Carson set down his cup carefully, his mind racing through calculations, what Axel might know, what he could prove, how dangerous he might be. I'm not sure I appreciate your tone, Axel. And I'm not sure I appreciate men who prey on broken soldiers. Axel leaned forward, and suddenly the veneer of civility cracked enough to reveal something feral underneath. See, I know things about you, Carson. Things from the war that might interest folks in town. Carson's blood turned to ice water. Shiloh Creek. He'd hoped that particular shame had died with the men who witnessed it, the moment when Sergeant Carson Blair had abandoned his post, left his men to die while he cowered in a creek bed until the shooting stopped. Only Axel had seen him there, trembling and weeping like a child. That was a long time ago, Carson managed. Was it? Seems like yesterday to me. I can still see you, face down in the mud, while good men bled out calling for help you were too yellow to give. Axel's voice remained conversational, which somehow made it more terrifying. What do you think the fine folks of this town would say if they knew their war hero was actually a coward who bought his medals from dead men's families? The accusation hit like a physical blow because it was true. Every ribbon on Carson's dress uniform had been purchased from desperate widows. Every commendation forged by a corrupt quartermaster who needed drinking money. His heroic reputation was built on lies as carefully constructed as his business. Empire. What do you want? Carson's voice was barely a whisper. Simple. You're going to leave the Claytons alone. Tear up whatever papers you've got, forgive their debts, and find some other way to make your railroad money. I don't know what you're talking about. Axel smiled, and it was like watching a wolf bare its teeth. The survey, Carson. The one that's going to make the Clayton bottomland worth 10 times what you're offering. Did you think Reed Mercer wouldn't notice all those strangers with surveying equipment? Did you think no one would put the pieces together? Carson felt his carefully laid plans crumbling like sand castles at high tide. Even if what you're saying were true, I can't just. You can. You will. Axel stood, leaving his untouched coffee on the table. Because if you don't, I'll make sure this whole town knows exactly what kind of man you really are. And then I might get creative about how I express my displeasure. After Axel left, Carson poured himself 3 fingers of his father's best whiskey and tried to think. The man was clearly unbalanced. Everyone knew that. But unbalanced didn't mean powerless, and it certainly didn't mean wrong. If Axel started talking, if he had proof about the medals, about Shiloh Creek, Carson's empire was built on reputation. Without that, he was just another failed soldier trying to make his way in a world that had no use for cowards. Meanwhile, back at the Clayton farm, Mabel had discovered something miraculous. As she'd worked through the night, painting the landscape of their land with fierce determination, Jonah had begun to speak. Not the careful, measured words he'd used since coming home, but the real voice she'd fallen in love with, full of dreams and plans and stubborn hope. We could plant apple trees along the creek, he was saying, his eyes focused on her painted landscape. The soil's perfect there, good drainage. And that south-facing slope would be ideal for a vineyard. Mabel's brush never stopped moving, but her heart soared with each word. This was what she'd been painting toward, not just medals and memories, but possibility itself. The railroad will need timber, Jonah continued, his voice growing stronger. We could harvest selectively, keep the land healthy while making good money. And once the depot's built, we'll have direct access to markets in the city. For the first time since he'd come home, Jonah sounded like a man with a future instead of a past. The painted medals on the wall seemed to gleam with approval, but it was the landscape beside them that truly mattered now. Rolling hills and Silver Creek, apple trees heavy with fruit, a home worth fighting for. Outside their window, dawn was painting the real landscape in shades of gold and hope. Neither of them noticed the rider approaching in the distance. Carson Blair, his face grim with decision, coming to make an offer that would change everything. But this time, he wouldn't be coming as a predator. He'd be coming as something far more dangerous, a desperate man with nothing left to lose. Carson Blair arrived as the morning mist lifted from the valley floor, But this wasn't the confident predator who'd visited days before. His usually immaculate suit was wrinkled, his eyes red-rimmed from a sleepless night. Behind him rode two men Mabel didn't recognize, rough types with guns on their hips and cruelty in their faces. Jonah was on the front porch, working his arms with the determination of a man rebuilding himself one push at a time. He stopped when he saw the approaching riders, his soldiers' instincts reading danger in their formation. "Mabel," he called softly, "stay inside." But Mabel had already seen them through the kitchen window, had noted the way Carson sat his horse differently today, like a man who'd run out of civilized options. She dried her paint-stained hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch beside her husband's chair. "Carson," Jonah said carefully, "you've brought company. Last chance, Clayton." Carson's voice was hoarse, desperate. "Take my offer now, or I'll make you wish you had." "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise." Carson gestured to his companions. "Meet the Kellum brothers. They specialize in collecting debts for men who can't afford to be patient anymore." The larger of the two brothers, scarred face, dead eyes, spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Heard you got yourself crippled in the war, soldier boy. Shame. Makes our job easier." Something cold and hard settled in Jonah's chest. He'd faced worse men than these on battlefields where courage was measured in blood and determination. But then he'd had legs to stand on, weapons in his hands, the brotherhood of his unit around him. "You've got no legal right to be here," Mabel said, her voice steady despite the fear racing through her veins. Carson laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Legal right? Ma'am, I own half the judges in 3 counties. Your husband owes money. He can't pay, and I've got papers that say I can collect however I see fit." He pulled documents from his coat, forged promissory notes, falsified debts, the paperwork that would justify whatever violence followed. It was a familiar pattern, one he'd used to acquire properties throughout the valley. Desperate people signed anything when threatened with losing everything. "I never signed those," Jonah said, recognizing the trap even as it closed around them. "Your word against mine. And you're just a broken-down cripple with paint-stained fingers." Carson's cruelty had a panicked edge now, the sound of a man who knew he was drowning and would pull anyone under to save himself. The Kellum brothers dismounted, hands drifting toward their weapons. The larger one took a step toward the porch, and Mabel instinctively moved closer to Jonah's chair. They were alone, vulnerable, exactly the kind of easy prey Carson had learned to hunt. Then the shot rang out, not aimed at anyone, just a sharp crack that split the morning air and froze everyone in place. From the tree leaned beyond the barn, Axel Langley emerged with a rifle in his hands and death in his eyes. "Morning, Carson," he called conversationally. "Didn't expect to see you back so soon, especially not with hired killers." The transformation in Carson was immediate, confidence crumbling into naked fear. "This doesn't concern you, Axel." "Funny thing about that." Axel walked closer, his rifle never wavering from Carson's chest. "I've developed a powerful interest in protecting war veterans from cowards and thieves. Call it a hobby." The Kellum brothers had gone very still, recognizing something in Axel that spoke to predators on a level deeper than thought. This wasn't a man to be intimidated or bought. This was something wild and damaged and utterly without fear. "You can't fight all of us," the scarred brother said, but his hand had moved away from his gun. "Can I?" Axel's smile was winter cold. "Tell you what, let's find out. You boys draw whenever you're ready. I promise it'll be educational." For a long moment, the tableau held. Carson sweating despite the morning chill, the Kellum brothers calculating odds they didn't like, Axel patient as a hunting cat. Then from behind Axel came other voices, other footsteps. Reed Mercer appeared. First, carrying his father's old shotgun. Then Nia Rhodes with her husband's revolver, Dr. Holloway with his medical bag and a determined expression, half a dozen other neighbors who'd gotten word that the Clayton family needed help. "Seems like the whole valley's developed an interest in your business practices, Carson," Reed said mildly. "Amazing what people will do when they hear the truth about railroad surveys and forged documents." Carson's face went white. His carefully constructed empire was collapsing in real time, and there was nowhere to run. The Kellum brothers were already backing toward their horses. Hired muscle had no loyalty when the odds turned impossible. "This isn't over," Carson snarled, but the words rang hollow. "Yes, Axel said quietly. It is. They watched Carson and his thugs ride away, dust clouds marking their retreat. Slowly, the neighbors began to disperse, offering quiet words of support before returning to their own lives. But Axel lingered, his rifle now cradled casually in his arms. Thank you, Mabel said simply. He nodded once, then looked at the bedroom window where candlelight had flickered through so many dark nights. Heard about your painting, the medals and such. Would you like to see them? Inside, Axel stood before the wall where Mabel had transformed blank space into something magnificent. The medals gleamed with perfect detail, but it was the landscape beside them that held his attention. Rolling hills, Silver Creek, apple trees heavy with promise. You painted hope, he said wonderfully. I painted what I could see in the dark. Mabel replied, what we both needed to remember. Jonah wheeled his chair closer to the wall, his hand finding Mabel's paint-stained fingers. The medals would always be there, honoring what they'd sacrificed. But the landscape beside them promised what they could still build together. A future worth fighting for, one brushstroke at a time. As autumn gave way to winter, the railroad made its survey public. The Clayton farm was indeed worth a fortune, enough to secure their future and fund all the dreams Mabel had painted on their bedroom wall. But more than money, they'd found something precious in those dark nights of candlelight and determination. The knowledge that love could transform any ending into a beginning. The medals on the wall caught the morning light, but it was the painted landscape beside them that truly blazed with promise. If this tale of painted courage and unshakable love stirred your heart, kindly like and share it with souls who need reminding that hope can bloom in the darkest hours. And do subscribe for more stories of ordinary folk who discovered extraordinary strength when the world tried to break them. Tell us in the comments below, where are you watching from today?